Okay, I need to click this. Okay. There's still some people joining, but I'll slowly start this talk. So welcome everybody. This is my second time I'm having this talk about writing tests like Shakespeare, which is a clickbait title for I'm going to talk about the screenplay pattern. The talk will be rather codey. There's a lot of code slides in here, but I'll try to explain everything I do. It would help if you know about Java or C# or something similar, but I guess most of you, even if you never wrote in those languages, will be able to get the basic idea of screenplay anyway. There are a lot of implementations in Screenplay. I will use my own because it's a very simple implementation, and I'll explain that a bit more during the talk. Okay. I already put in the chat if you have any questions. Please put them in the chat. I'll try to get to them in between slides if it's like a quick answer. If it requires more talking, I just keep them for the Q&A at the end of the session. Okay. So some words about me. You can find me on various social networks like GitHub, which totally is a social network to me. I'm working at Rewe Digital in Cologne in Germany, which is basically a grocery company, and I'm more or less doing the online shop of that and stuff that's working in background. So this is what I do. I'm a quality engineer, software engineer, ambassador, whatever. So ambassadoring is what gets me to occasions like this. I learned to be a developer. I hated to fix bugs, so I eventually turned into a test automation engineer, and I like to automate a lot of things, not only tests. I also have this rare defect to like continuous integration pipelines, which is quite uncommon among my colleagues, I learned. And I'm quite fascinated by cognitive biases, so you might have seen some of my talks or workshops regarding that topic. Yeah, and I tend to visit conferences and webinars like this one to talk about all that stuff. And what I usually don't talk about is that I like running, like half marathons and stuff like that. But that's only on a side note. So, as I said, I'm going to talk about the screenplay pattern. And the screenplay patterns, basically, the basic idea is to structure tests more in a different way. So they are, well, what are they? Why would I structure my tests? I mean, it's a superstructure on top of something that might already be flimsy and flaky. So why would I do that? Well, one very good reason, and in fact, it's one of the best reasons I can think about, is readability. So I oftentimes encounter test code that was just like gibberish. I didn't get what the test is about, and I couldn't understand why it was failing I mean, if I couldn't understand what it's about, if it fails, well, what does it tell me, right? So this is quite important. I think that tests are readable. Also, they should be maintainable. Like, I can go there and take some of the code and understand what it's doing. And if I change the code in one place, it should also be fixed in another place at the same time. Reusable. I don't want to write every single step every time I test something. So I don't want to click on that stupid button like 20 times. I want to implement that once and then reuse that code. I also want it to be extendable. So it's pretty much like reusing code. I want to build up on the structure to be faster in writing new tests. I want it to be changeable. I can easily go there into the code and change some of the details, and it will make sense to me and it will run. So this is also important. I encountered a lot of test suites where I couldn't touch anything without having a failing test. Yeah, and it should also be understandable how the test works, really. Like what is being used here? What's going on? Why is this requiring this or something like that? So that's also important to me. I also want it to be debuggable. So if something fails, I want to set a breakpoint in my IDE, and I want to see, okay, step by step, this is what's happening. This fails. Okay, right. And I don't always want to do that, but I want a good report that tells me this failed. I was trying to do this in order to do that, and that failed. You know, I tried to log in. I clicked the login button, that worked. I tried to fill in my username, that worked. I tried to fill in my password, that worked. I tried to click the login button, oh, that wasn't there, so that failed. Something like that. So I like those reports. I don't want to have something like login failed. That doesn't tell me too much. So I found a nice little challenge project I could do for automation. I'm going to talk a lot about Selenium testing here, but one of the strong sides of, yeah, so we're going to do a lot of UI testing in this talk. Bear in mind, it does not need to be UI. Screenplay can work also for APIs, can also work for CLIs, you name it. It's quite a general concept. So here's the challenge. It's the automationpractice.com website. And the task that we're going to automate is basically we go into the website, we click sign in. We want to create an account, so we enter our email address, click the create account button, which takes us to this form, which is quite big. We'll enter our personal information. Then we need to enter an address. Right, and then we'll click register. And eventually, we'll end up on the My Account page. So that's a challenge, pretty straightforward. Basically, a click scene that we need to do. But we need to do a lot of clicks. We need to fill a lot of things. And what's also nice is we have some asynchronous stuff going on, which is always a bit nasty to implement in Selenium. And please, yeah, I know you could use Cypress or Playwright to make that less annoying, but well, that's not the point of the talk. So trivial, we could just use direct interaction with the website to fulfill that task of automating this click scene. And in that case, we would have our test, and that will directly interact with the elements on the page. We'd have the tools set up in the test. We'd have all the locators for the elements that we want to interact with in the test. We will have all our interaction logic that's required, like what can I do with this element? Okay, I can locate it, but what can I do with it? Can I answer text? Can I click on it? I don't know. Do I need to wait for something to happen there? So this is what I mean with red tag interactions. And we also need to manage the state. So we have our test and it's running, and it's changing the state of the system on the test. So we need to bear that in mind as well. Which side are we on right now? do we see that form right now, or are we on an error page or something like that? So it's also something we need to care about during our test, which I refer to as state. And if we'd have a second test that would do something similar, let's say login after registration or something like that, we will have the same stack in that test. We could reuse barely anything. So we'd have the same interactions in test 1 and test 2. So let's look into some code. What we could do is something like this. If you don't know WebDriver Manager up here, you do want to use that, trust me. Because it sets up your WebDriver binary and gives you WebDriver and everything, and it's an awesome tool created by Bonnie Garcia, who I owe a lot of beers for this. So in this case, we start to register and we set up our WebDriver in line 3. And then we navigate our WebDriver to the automationpractice.com website. So we have a tool in line 3 and the state in line 9. We change state. We navigated the browser somewhere else, so the state has changed. We need to keep that in mind. Okay, next we'll find the element by the text sign in and click on it. So here we have our first locator, and we also have an interaction logic, so we click on it. This is kind of the simplest interaction you can think about. Next, we have some more complex interaction, because now we need to wait for the email create input, and then we can send the keys of the email address to that. And then we click on the submit create. So now we end up on the next form. We again need to wait for something. We click on the first input. We send a lot of keys. We enter all the personal information. We also have some selects down here, so it's getting a bit complicated. So one can imagine that this code shouldn't be in any test that interacts with the select, for example. And it's getting even worse. So now we enter all the personal information here. So bear in mind also, this is not only a duplication of the locators and the interaction logic, but also this test data is also, it needs to be located anywhere where I enter it. So this is another problem that we're going to solve later with Screenplay. And finally, we can click on that button, and then we can assert some things in order to verify that the test ran successfully. Okay, no questions till here. Didn't expect that. So this is pretty straightforward. This is one way of implementing tests in Selenium, right? So it's probably the most stupid way one can think of, but to be honest, it has some advantages. I mean, if something went wrong, I will have an error quite directly in the test. I don't need to ask myself, how is this working? Why is this working? Why is this not working? But of course, it's extremely verbose. Any other tests that I've written that's doing similar stuff will have a lot of code duplicates, and all this test data is lying around in midst of the test. And at least I could have done some local variables, but I wanted to keep it short. So we end up with like 48 lines of code, but only one file to look at. So actually, that's an advantage if I only have one place where stuff's going on. That is helping sometimes. So I don't know about you, but I saw some test suites where I needed to analyze an error, and I needed to click through a lot of files to finally find the actual code that was failing. So that doesn't happen here. But you speak an infinite deal of nothing to quote The Merchant of Venice, Act 1, Scene 1. So here's the popular go-to thing that we can do to avoid this nonsense, and this is page objects. And I'll go over this quite quickly just to explain the basic idea. So I have a test, and now this test is using a page object, and the page object is doing the interaction with the elements on the website. So I have the state and tools set up in the test, and while I keep the interaction and the locators with the page object. And now I only have the state, and the tools may be duplicated in various tests. I can also create some kind of a base test, which is the usual thing that one can do in page objects, and have that abstracted away anyways. But the thing is, the most interaction, like the test data, the interactions, and the locators, they are kept in one place where they belong, right? So, for example, I have a registration page, and this is keeping all these nasty input locators and the logic for waiting for stuff and all that stuff. Okay, so real quick, with page objects, I'll usually have a page object. So it's basically a class that I give the WebDriver to, and I can now use named methods like go to sign-in page instead of clicking on something. So I'll do something that actually makes some sense on a application logic. So I'm doing something with the application which is something a user might want to do. So then I'm on the sign-in page. I start the registration with my email address. And now I can do real complex things in just one line, or at least with just one statement. So for example, I can fill in all the personal information. I can fill all the details to the postal address of Romeo Montague. And then I can, well, that's stupid still, register page submit, right? Okay, and then I can do assertions on the page that I'm actually at. So I can, for example, just check, does the register page have any error messages? Because in that case, I don't need to wait for the page transition that might happen next, and so on. So that's a nice thing. The details are now on the page objects. The top level interactions are in the text. Okay. And if we look in the sign-in page, just quick, we have the locators usually in the class body, and we have the interactions in the methods. So also nice segregation between the two. So we end up with the test being, well, quite tidy, I think. We still have the problem of test data lying around in the test, which is not too nice. We have some page objects, which can be real simple, like in Java, we can use records for that these days. Yeah, and they own the WebDriver. So this is actually fine. So we spare 20 lines of code in the test. So the test is being a bit more concise now, but we end up with 82 lines more code actually in total. So this only pays off once we got more and more tests. So if we pile them up, it pays off quite quickly, but just recognizing one test, it's actually not a good deal. And we do have now not one place to look for errors, but 4, because we do have 3 page objects. Page objects can be reused as a test. This is, of course, a clear advantage, but also need to be changed for these. So sometimes you will add another test, which requires you add some functionality, for example, to your homepage. This is actually quite common. But actually, the homepage is still the homepage. And it's kind of a, well, the homepage is responsible for a lot of things. And we need to change it for a lot of things. And this kind of breaks the beautiful principle of the single responsibility pattern. And we don't have a real notion of a user here. So we cannot see Romeo in here. It's not visible. There's no entity which is representing a user in this case. So there's a question. Wait a minute. So is there a tool which generates such tests by providing sources of the HTML page? What I mean, there are a lot of code here which require just copy and paste the specified labels, text names. Yeah, so we'll reduce that need drastically. I'm not a big fan of generating something out of HTML. Because then I will have something that references a lot of stuff that are really irrelevant for what I want to do. So the nice thing about not generating anything is that we're concentrating on the stuff that that's relevant for our test, while the rest of the page can change a lot. And we also identify the objects by identifiers which are stable, so we can choose the identifier. For example, you might have noticed I chose to identify the sign-in button by the link text. The sign-in button might have some classes attached to it. It might even have an ID. Those things are invisible, and they can change without the page being broken from the user's perspective. If the text of the link changes, well, it might change. It might be changed to sign up instead of sign in for some reason, or they might just get rid of the space in between and decide that sign in is actually a word. But that will be a visible change. That will be something also a user notices. So I'm a big fan of writing those tests myself. Well, I get the notion of generating that stuff. I totally do, but yeah, it will be a lot of stuff that's irrelevant for your test. So, well, hope that answered your questions, Andre. Not saying it's an entirely bad idea, but not my cup of tea and not what we're talking about here, I guess. So, finally, let's go to screenplays. So this was all just foreplay, now it's screenplay. In screenplays, we don't have a test, we have a screenplay, because that's such a nice word. And a screenplay directs an actor, or in fact, actually multiple actors. And actors have abilities which enable actions to interact, for example, with elements on the page, or APIs on, well, endpoints on an API. That would also be possible with screenplay. Not so much with page objects. One could think of something similar for APIs, but it's not common to use. Okay, so let's look into those concepts. So the actor is actually the one who's taking the state now away from the screenplay. Not the entire state, but the actor itself can handle some state. Then we have the abilities. The abilities take over the task of setting up tools and providing them so the actor will be able to use them. So let's look into those basic concepts. So we created an actor named Romeo. So an actor usually has a name to be identified, for example, in logs or in reports. This is quite nice, especially if you have more of them. And this is keeping the state. So next so an actor can't do anything. An actor is not having the web driver like a page object has one, but an actor has something different, an ability. And the standard ability, and I think almost any implementation of Screenplay has this, has an ability named like this, is browse the web. So Romeo can new browse the web, so we create that and we get it a local WebDriver supplier of type Chrome. This is an implementation detail. There are also defaults for this, and we provide the starting page because this spares us the need to navigate to there. So that's all the setup that we saw in the page objects implementation earlier. And now we have set that up. So we have actors and abilities. Next, so let's make him do something, right? So how do we do that? And we do that with the concept of tasks. An actor can perform tasks, and they are made of actions. So how does that work? So now we have the interactions and the locators, just like in the page objects, now in the tasks. So one could think, yeah, that's just the same thing, right? That's not, because a page is just something in your web application. And, well, it doesn't want anything. Some pages are really one-purpose things, but some pages can have a lot of purposes. A task is more or less defined by, this is my single purpose, and it can span multiple pages, in fact. So this is nice. We can now say register, for example, which spans 3 pages, as we saw earlier in the page object example. But it makes sense, right? I mean, a tester, I would say, hey, can you please test the register feature? And they would know what to do. I don't need to tell them, go to click the sign-in button, enter your email address, fill the form, click register, and expect to be there. I mean, I could do that, and they would be able to understand what I mean. But I could also, if to a human, I would just say, hey, try registration, right? So this is something that we can actually do. So let's register. We again have our email address. Now we say Romeo does new start registration with an email address. So I'm not doing that yet. I'm still doing the same steps as we did before. And this is what will happen, as you can see in the video, entering the email address, clicking that button, and ending up on the create account form. Right, so we could use multiple abilities, by the way. So in one task, so this is a start registration task, we could actually use more than browse the web. We could, for example, use call HTTP APIs, for example, to, I don't know, maybe ensure that the registering of the account worked, or to simulate that the user would use a mobile phone app to do something after registration. So this is all possible using multiple abilities. So now here you can see the familiar code. We find the web element by its link text, click on that, have the interaction here. Now we wait for that stuff to happen. So you might realize this is all in the task now. It's not in the register page, for example. So if I would enter the register page, not to create an account, but to log in, and you might have noticed the page has both forms there. So in some trivial implementations of page objects, I would have waited for the whole page to be ready for both things. In fact, in this nasty application, I'm not saying it's a great one, it's good for testing and demonstrating, that registration form takes longer to load than the login form. The login form is basically there instantaneous. So if I now had a login task, I would not do this waiting, because this is not the purpose why I'm on this page. I'm on this page solely to register, so I need to wait. If I would create a login task, I wouldn't. So let's go on. As you can see, this task, even though it's really, really stupidly simple, already spans 2 pages. First, the home page. Second, the what did I call it earlier? I think it's a login register page. So the combined page where I can start the registration process. And as I said earlier, those interactions that I'm using here are all tied to the intention of starting the registration process. Not to some page, not to some fancy UI elements. It's the sole purpose of this that I want to do. And this is quite elegant, I think, with this pattern. Okay, so next we can use a register screenplay to do the enter personal information and then enter the whole address. So I can split that up into tasks. I could also say, okay, fill the whole form because it's just not worth doing this in 2 interactions. But I thought in this case, I think it was just too many parameters, and I thought it would be nicer to split it up. And then I say submit that form. Also, these 3 things could be 1 task. So, and now one thing remains, which is how can we confirm success? One thing that I wanted, I'll do that later. Okay, so there's another concept in Screenplay we need to learn. So this was pretty much all about tasks. Maybe I will just point out a bit. As you can see, a task has only one method, which takes the actor as its argument, and then we take the ability to get the WebDriver. So this is the basic, very basic concept of a task. It only needs to implement this one method. We can actually use a lambda to create a task. That's just fine. It's a real simple concept. If the actor doesn't have the browser web ability in this case, it would throw an exception, and we would exactly see in the exception, oh, it's a missing ability exception, and we're missing this ability. So we need to go back to our test setup and add that ability to the actor. So this is also a nice, powerful thing that we can use. Okay, so next concept. An actor can also ask questions, because what we can't do right now is to check the state of the application. We can know what we did, so we can manage some state, but we cannot check if the state actually, we cannot assert on the state right now. We don't have these this concept, at least not from the test. I mean, in the task, we can also check everything that we want. We have the WebDriver, but we cannot get that data out to the test. So this is one missing thing. So we can ask questions about the state of elements on the screen. And here's how, so this is the test that we just left. And now we can just add this assert that Romeo checks, and this is a new method, new login status is true. So what is login status? Login status is an implementation of question which has generic type Boolean. And it will just implement one method which now actually has a return type of type Boolean, and it again takes the actor as an argument. So same simple concept than a task, but it has a return type. That's basically it. And this question is quite easy. It will find the element by link text sign-in, and if that's empty, we can assume that we are logged in, so it will return true. Yeah. I'm always ahead of my slides. Okay, so the register screenplay looks like this right now. We also have a start registration task. We have the enter personal information task. We have the enter address task. We have the login status question. And that's it. So we have one more file. We saved some lines of code, actually, because we don't have as many locators, because we add the locators right where we need them, right to the interaction code, which at first I found a bit strange, to be honest. So I've been implementing page objects test suites for a long time. And then they told me, yeah, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to put those locators in some constants. You can just put them into the interactions. Actually, you can also put them into constants of your tasks. But actually, you shouldn't use page objects, not even to, collect the locators. That's not how this is supposed to work. And I was like, oh, that feels odd, because now I will have the locator maybe in several tasks. And then I realized when I tried this for a long time, it doesn't happen that much. I mean, there are some elements you keep interacting with, like a search bar or a logout button or a login button. Yeah, those are the things that you keep interacting in various tasks and various tests. But it doesn't happen too much. I mean, what can you do with a login button? You can click on it. Yeah, just do that. Just create a task to log in, right? And then what else do you want to do? What to click that for? So actually, I found out, well, most of the locators are actually once used for one task. If that wasn't true, you can still create a stupid page object to keep all your locators in. But please never do any interaction code in there. No waiting, no nothing, just the locators. That's fine. It's not pure screenplay. And I would recommend, if you try this concept, to not do it up front, but maybe refactor it towards that. So tasks and questions are very reusable. You can even split them up. They serve only one purpose. And tricks, this is something like, I don't know, I did an awful lot of hacks in Selenium tests. I did API calls to verify that stuff worked. I did waiting stunts. I had UI elements that required an awful lot of interaction with the elements. All that is only applied in the context of the intention of the goal that I want to reach. And this is actually quite nice. I like that a lot. So we still have some minor things we might want to resolve. And this is an extension to the pure screenplay, which was coined, I think, more than 10 years ago now. And that's facts. So an actor can also learn facts. And they enable questions and tasks. I referred earlier that we have an awful lot of test data lying around in our test code here still. And that's, well, not too nice. We could use a constant collection or something like that, which is exactly what I did several times. So I would have something like here, the email address, the personal information, or the postal address. So these I put in something like a enum or a, well, collection class for constants. And this is exactly what we'll do now. So a fact can be something as simple as an email address class, which implements the fact interface, which is actually only a marker interface. And this will only wrap a string, basically, but it will say, hey, I'm an email address. I'm not such a regular string, I'm an email address. And it can also carry a constant, like this one, default email address. So now I not have the string romeo@shakespeareframework.org, but I have a default email address, which expresses in my test code, I just don't care. This does not need to be a special email address, or, well, actually, it does need to be a special email address. It should be the default email address, but it's not important what that is, actually. Same for this personal information. I can create a fact class personal information, which takes all these strings and the local date, and I can have a default personal information, which again expresses in the test, I don't care. It does not need to be that. It's just, I just use the default because I need something here. It's not important for my test. And of course, I can also use a builder, same concept here, to change just one field maybe. For example, you might want to change the zip code to an invalid zip code. Well, then you say default address, but change the zip code to this rubbish. And then you can have your negative testing where you say, I expect this error message here. So again, it expresses the intent much better, and it does not pollute my test with details that aren't really important for the test. Yeah, so one question from chat, why do we need that fact interface? To be honest, I had plans for, so you can just use data classes, period, that's it. So I have plans for the fact interface, they aren't implemented yet. So if you check out shakespeareframework.org, I'm currently working on some features where I need that marker interface in the implementation, but to be honest, right now you can just use the data class. You're welcome. Now we can now the test is even more concise. It does not, it's no longer bloated with test data, and now we can still do another thing which is really nice in Screenplay. In page objects, it always bothered me without knowing that I have basically this one layer of abstraction. I have the page, and then I have the elements quite directly, and I can use complex methods to have complex interactions with that one page. But as I said earlier, I cannot really well have an interaction which spans multiple pages. That's nasty. It does not fit the concept really well. So here, you might have spotted that problem in the design earlier. So these 4 tasks actually depend on each other. If I didn't start the registration, I cannot enter personal information because there will be no personal information form. And also the enter address wouldn't work. And in the end, submit register form wouldn't work. So that's kind of, well, this is not an atomic thing I can do, right? But I could just group them together. And this is what I stated right at the beginning. I can now have a meaningful register task, which is something that I can tell somebody to do. So where's all the data? You might have spotted it's in line 7, 8, and 9. Because now the actor can learn these default things up front. I can make him learn the default email address, the default personal information, and the default address. And now in the register tasks, which I created new, I put all these thus calls, and I just remember that stuff and it's referenced by the class here. If you check out, for example, the C# implementation or the JavaScript implementation, they have a string key. I didn't like that too much, but maybe it will be added later. And now we don't need to state all these this boring stuff outside. We can maybe add some fields to the register task still to implement some deviations from the defaults, but we don't need to state them all upfront. Yeah, somebody put in some highlights there. I don't remember who that was. Sorry. So now our test looks like this. And now the question is, of course, oh no, we have built this nice abstraction. We have like an infinite number of abstraction layers now, which is nice when you design your tests. But now the test fails and it's really hard. And I don't like reading stack traces and everything. And this, I don't want to do this. So here's another concept implemented in most screenplay implementations, at least probably all of them, which is reporters. And I call this informs, and I can put in a reporter interface, which is some class implementing a reporter interface, right? And you can then override things like start task, finish task successful, finish task failure, and so on. And this comes with Shakespeare out of the box. This is the SLF4J reporter, which just logs Romeo does register with this email address, Romeo does start registration, again with this email address, personal information. So it puts out the parameters, for example, so we can always check, okay, what did he do? Why did he enter this? That shouldn't happen. So it's probably a problem with the interaction code. Or we can see here, okay, we got the wrong default address. We wanted to overwrite the zip code, but that didn't work. And yeah, so on. And we can just look up the logs and we'll probably see pretty fast what failed. For example, here I have a warning logged. Romeo does register, so this failed with no such element exception. Well, where? I can see start registration didn't work because there was no such element identified by link text selector sign in. So the sign in button failed. Probably because my previous test already made it log in and I failed to properly tidy up my test. It's not built in. So a question from the chat from Dinto. I hope I didn't slaughter your name. The framework, does this framework the possibility to provide formatted report with JSON SCV, CSV, I guess, like something like that? Yeah, thanks. Not built in, but you can easily implement that yourself if you like. So you can just take the reporter interface and create something like that. It's an interesting idea. I haven't thought about that yet. Or XML, if you're more into that. For now, I only wanted a human readable format. So this is why I came up with the SLF4J reporter, because now I can just go to GitHub Actions, look up the job, and we'll see this, what you can see here, the gray boxes, and it will tell me pretty much what went wrong. But yeah, probably it's a nice idea to have some machine readable report type as well. Ooh, I'm running out of time. Yeah, tasks and questions provide context to failures. So this is why I created this type of report. Some quick conclusion. You might remember those good properties of test abstraction. So I do think that we can, for example, easily debug this stuff because it's pure Java. There's nothing magic. There's no auto magic in it. We have some nice reports. We have good maintainability, I think. We can really easy share this code. So I struggled a lot with teams providing page objects because they had their opinion about a certain page. And the other team wanted to reuse one aspect of their page object implementation, but they wanted to add another element that they wanted to interact with. And that doesn't work well. So there, I think that notion Andre came up with to have HTML generating those page objects, that would work for those teams. But with all the downsides that I came up earlier with, so with tasks, I can now say, okay, I'm responsible for the login and register functionality. I can provide you with my implementation of a register task, and you are responsible for some feature, for example, the shopping cart functionality in the shop. And you can just take my register task and use that in your test. And you don't need to care about any details how registration works. You can just use it, and then you go navigate to your basket and check out all that stuff that you need to check there. So it's really nice for code sharing and reusability and all that stuff. I think understandability is quite high with Screenplay, because it's this notion of I have a user who does something that they should be able to do. And it's an intention, it's something that a user actually can do, which is a real successful design guideline for me in the past. So I was always thinking, okay, how should I do that? Can I cheat here? And oftentimes it was a good guideline for me to not cheat my way around things that the user can't do. Sometimes a direct API call to some public API is okay, but that should be a conscious decision, I think. Yeah. So I will just conclude. No sweat Shakespeare. This is where I got all the Shakespeare quotes from. I didn't invent Screenplay, far from it. I invented something similar, and it was real worse. And then I learned about Screenplay and was falling in love with it, basically. More or less the original framework for Java would be Serenity BDD, which is a far more complex implementation of Screenplay. I tried to make this talk with Serenity, but it requires a lot more setup because it provides a lot more functionality in the end. But I thought it's really not nice for teaching this concept. There's a kind of original article which is called Page Objects Refactored, Solid Steps to the Screenplay, or back then it was named Journey Pattern. And this is my framework, shakespeareframework.org. It's I feel like it's a good trade-off when you want to get into Screenplay. I think this is a good starting point, maybe better than to get into Serenity BDD, which has just a lot of functionality that you don't need in your way when you try to understand what Screenplay is all about. So that concludes my talk. And should you have any questions, we have at least 5 minutes left. I'm sorry, I went quite over time. But I can extend this. So shoot. So as I understand this framework with Chrome headless driver, do it have all tool options, especially for graphic cards? Also, do it support Chrome Canvas and Weber features to get objects? Well, what this builds upon is basically Selenium right now. I'm working in secret a bit with another implementation of browser web using Playwright, which might be a bit nicer, a bit faster. Regarding Canvas, so it can only do what Selenium does, or whatever your ability allows you to do. So Selenium does not understand Canvas, obviously. But if you have some extension that allows you to search in Canvas then that would do. So this is not an all-in-one solution for anything. But it helps you to combine different technologies. For example, you could have an ability with rest assured or OK HTTP to have API calls. You can use Playwright, you can use Selenium. So you can mix and match whatever works for you, whatever gives you the abilities to achieve your goals. And so creating an ability is really easy. So most of the time it's just put in one object that is provided by whatever framework. So whatever Selenium, for example, it's WebDriver. For rest assured, it might be a REST client, something like that. And then you have just this one getter that will give it to your actor to interact with the stuff. And then you have to implement all the tasks, of course. So I hope that answered your question, Dimitrov.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
I'd like to say that the presentation was very, 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 very good. I like it very much.
Thanks.
I personally also like this different levels of abstractions. I like to think about them. I like discussing them. And what you just shown, especially that it is your custom implementation. So I like to see like where your thoughts going on. It's cool. And in that direction, I have one question that may be a little bit provoking to think about, like what should be hidden, what should be shown. In my opinion, actor should speak only domain language, right? And in my opinion, in order to underneath support maybe WebDriver, maybe REST assured for REST API communication, maybe some other implementation right underneath. But on the high level, actor should still speak the same language, like has such ability, can do such tasks. Then my question to one little method, get WebDriver from actor, isn't it encapsulation breaking?
I don't think so. I mean, getting the driver is a function of the ability. I mean, you could deviously just call that from the test, but you shouldn't. I mean, only the actor, only in the task, you should call this. You could call it.
Just why I'm asking it, because for me, WebDriver is about implementation of the tests, but not about the application. That's why I think I asked that question.
Yeah, I mean, at some point you need that. You need that technology. So the tasks and the questions are by intention breaking that domain language. So in the test, you will only see domain language. You will only see things that will make sense to a product owner or to anybody, basically. You probably can get rid of all the special characters and put it as documentation. So the best kind of a test, in my opinion, living documentation. How awesome is that? And then on the task level, on the task implementation level, you will get into the language of the UI, or even further down, you will even get into the implementation details of the UI, which is kind of harsh. I do get that. So I think John Smart, who's one of the authors of the original article, he has a notion of elements, and he has those elements to interact with. So he would have something like a login button, and you can only do this and this and that with it. It's pretty much like in page objects, you have the notion of modules, like a form could be a really huge module. I don't like that, but that might be a way, or a complex input field, like a date input, which has 3 fields, could be one module. And then you would have that abstraction still.
Yes, I like those abstractions, because in my opinion, in page objects, it's about objects on the page. It's not just page classes, right? But yeah, like I asked this question just for discussion. It's not like very bad thing, because I understand that. But just
I do like your question, to be honest, but it's really hard. I'm not sure if I understand what following your idea
like for
would lead to.
As I remember, maybe I'm mistaken, but on the actor object there were a method something like get WebDriver, and in my opinion, from actor class it's not proper method.
No.
But maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe it's not from actor.
You are mistaken. It's not actor, it's ability.
Oh, okay. Then
so the ability carries that technical asset.
Yeah, I now understand. Yeah.
So I do get. So that's the problem when presenting code.
Here exactly it was like this. So uses returns actor or returns
ability.
And ability has get web. Okay, then it's okay.
It's a short. It's quite short. I could have done the ability in one local variable, then it would have been clearer. That's a good point. Maybe I should do that at least for the first, when it occurs first, because I see how that's confusing. Thanks. That's a good remark. Any more questions? No, that's already answered. I'll just navigate back. I see. I missed to add the code for the browser web ability. That would have helped. So from this library, we can't get driver console. Any other reports from the driver, for example, CPU, GPU usage from driver? Because for my cases, it's very important for now. I should use simple Chrome headless directly. Okay. Thanks, Roman. It's not going there. It's not going into the technical details. Screenplay is really just a logical construct around all that, and it helps you to tie together all your technical details. So if you'd like, you can just use I think it's Puppeteer, right? I never touched that code, to be honest. Basically that stuff that Cypress uses, and or I think even Selenium 4 has this ability right now to directly interact with the Google Chrome DevTools and stuff like that. So you can use this in another ability, and you can extend the browser web ability to what you need. But this is not a feature that Screenplay provides you with. It's just a broader framework to write tests. It's not all the features that you've seen here for browser interactions. That was basic Selenium. I only have Selenium 4 in this project, so there's nothing special about that coming from Shakespeare. I'll just stop my share so I'm not looking the other way. Okay.
One question to organizers: is it possible to get the presentation?
I'm just navigating to get you the link. So the presentation is online. You can find it here right now. just share it in the link. In
Cool,
the chat.
thank you.
No worries. But I think the organizers promised a recording.
Yes, it will be.
Cool. So I think we have 5 minutes over time. You can reach out to me via Twitter. That's the most reliable thing for me. With my handle, I appreciate followers. You can find all the code that that you've seen on my GitHub page. So the example implementations that I've used are in the project writing tests like Shakespeare, and the actual framework can be found under shakespeareframework.org, and also, of course, on GitHub.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Have a good evening.